Finally, after a long wait, the midnight crowd, myself included, packed the AMC 14 theater. The lights dimmed. The projector rolled, and
You refer to the prophecy of the one who will bring balance to the force.
I like the special effects. I thought Lucas did a really good job.
It was so intense. I mean, my heart was beating. It's still beating now. And I just screamed, literally.
It was amazing. It was everything I thought it was going to be and more.
Anakin, tell him to take off.
I think that little Anakin Skywalker, and everyone's going to say it, stole that movie.
Anakin Skywalker, meet Obi-Wan Kenobi.
I mean, I don't want to bag the movie, but I really didn't think I cared about the characters.
I sense much fear in you.
It had good effects. I'm not too big on the acting, but hey, that's just me.
Thumbs up or thumbs down?
God, I'd put my feet up if I could.
Thumbs way down.
You didn't like it?
No, I think I deserve a public apology from George Lucas.
I was kind of disappointing in the ending, but yeah, I gotta say it was worth the wait.
Overall, our informal survey of 19 people after the midnight show tallies up this way. 10 loved it, 7 liked it or thought it was okay, and 2 are no longer Star Wars fans. But even those who weren't thrilled say they had fun being part of the hype.
Welcome to 1999 at 25. I am happy today to be joined by the host and creator of the Pop Culture Reflections podcast, Justin Skoviak. Justin, how are you?
I am doing really well. I greatly appreciate you inviting me on. It's my pleasure, and I look forward to this.
Yeah, I'm really happy to have you. I've been listening to your show for a little while since we kind of found each other on Twitter. Definitely right up my alley. You recently did an episode about Jeff Buckley, which was great. Jen and I are both of the right age to be big Jeff Buckley fans.
Yeah.
So that fits right into our podcast culture over here. So tell us a little bit about, for people who don't listen to your show, tell us a little bit about your approach, your vibe, what they would expect to hear listening to Pop Culture Reflections.
Yeah, no, so I don't like to box myself in or limit myself to a certain category. So a lot of shows like mine with pop culture, there's so many things you can talk about, whether it's movies, music, television. I love pro wrestling, so that's included as well. But, you even have fashion and food and all this, games, all that stuff that you can include. But for the most part, my main focus has been the stuff that I have connections with. And a lot of that is movies, music, pro wrestling, a little bit of television. But I do have some episodes where I do a little bit of a variety, where I try to include other things, incorporate other things. So yeah, if you're into 80s and 90s and some 2000s, it's probably a great show for you to check out if you're into pop culture like myself. So, and that's why I say on the show beyond, because I don't want to just stick to those 2 decades. I like to get into even some current stuff if I have a connection to it, and feel like it's something I can, get into and sink my teeth into.
Sure. Yeah. What year were you born?
I was born in 81.
Okay. You're on the Zennial cusp, right?
Yeah, I'm the eldest. I'm the eldest millennial you can get.
Eldest millennial, right? Yes.
Right.
And Jen and I are both youngest Gen Xers because we're both born in 79. So
excellent. Yes.
But yeah, certainly there's something about that 1978 through 82, right? Micro generation.
Yes.
Sometimes called the Oregon Trail generation, sometimes called Zennials. But for whom Jeff Buckley is a really big deal. And it was really interesting watching kind of the response to your episode as well, because there's basically two camps. There's like, oh my god, these are the best tracks, and then there's like, who's Jeff Buckley, right? And
yep.
I love that there's a few who's Jeff Buckley people, because that means they get to experience Grace for the first time, which I'm a little bit jealous of, and I hope blown away by it. I mean, I kind of wonder if it still like holds up out of context. I hope it does, but I can't see that it wouldn't, you know?
Oh, absolutely. It's just great music at its core. So yeah, I think if you let yourself over to it, it can definitely impact almost any listener at
Yeah.
any age to me.
Yeah, there's part of me that's always a little hesitant to to like recommend it to people, because I'm like, well, do you want to be devastated, or do you want to, like, you know, have a good day? Like, what's your it's that album and the Damien Rice album, like those the
Yes.
two where I'm just like, I mean, they're great, but like, are you going to be okay? This is what I'm worried about, you know.
Yeah, I got it.
All right, well, here we are on this very slow news day where nothing much happened in America. You know, it's funny, we also recorded one of these the day that O.J. Simpson died, so there's something about recording this podcast and weird things happening in American life.
Sure seems
Anyway,
that way,
it's
huh?
May 30th at 7:32 p.m. Eastern time, so you do
Mhm.
the math, people. I think you know what just happened. Anyway, we're going to talk not about that, and we're going to go back in time 25 years and cover some of the movies and music and other stuff that was going on this time 25 years ago. And of course, the biggest story of them all is May 19th, something that we have been talking about on the podcast recently, quite a bit anyway, but it finally happened. May 19th is the opening day of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Justin, what is your Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace story? Where were you in line around the block? Were you sitting at home not watching it? What were you doing?
Yeah, so I have an interesting background to or backstory, I guess, with Star Wars. As a kid, I loved Star Wars, especially The Empire Strikes Back. I
Best
didn't
movie.
watch it. I didn't watch them in the theater. I watched them, at home on. I think my mom had HBO at the time, so I was watching them for the first time there and enthralled by them. But come '99, at 18 years old,
Yeah.
I was at a different place in my life, and
Sure.
I did not see the Phantom Menace until I'm gonna say like '02.
Oh,
Yeah, it was a
that
while. It
is
was a while.
wild. That is wild.
Yeah, because
Wow.
in '99, I was like, that was when I started getting into movies and the history of movies, and I became like enthralled with Kubrick at the time. So I was
Sure.
watching a lot of that stuff, and Star Wars was completely off my radar at that point. So it
Okay.
took me a
Okay.
couple years to finally decide. I walk into the video store still at that point, and it's dying days, but then I rented Phantom Menace, and I don't know your takes on it, but not one of my favorite movies.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I understand that. I mean, especially if you didn't have an emotional connection to it, like when it came out. There's definitely people who I think are just never going to like warm to the Phantom Menace, right? But like
Yeah.
someone in your boat, I think, is exactly the right audience for that to happen, where it's like, you're just never going to care.
Right.
And that's completely okay. It sounds like you were, in fact, lining up around the block for Eyes Wide Shut.
Correct. That is right. Yes, that was
Camping
my
out overnight.
that was my
This opening.
headspace at that point. Which at that,
Yeah.
for Eyes Wide Shut, you didn't really have to camp out at night to get
You
in
did not.
get in the
You
doors
did
for
not.
that one. But yeah,
I saw it opening night, and there was no camping out required. But
not at all.
still, one of my favorite movies and one of the best movies
Mine as
of
well.
that year. I might say it's Kubrick's best movie, but that's controversial. Less so now, but it was then. When I was defending it back then, people were like, "What are you talking about?" But
Yeah,
it's like, no,
yeah.
this shit's gonna age well. You watch.
And it has absolutely.
It sure has. Anyway, you were not among the millions and millions of people who saw The Phantom Menace and its opening weekend. It took in $68 million opening weekend, which sounds like not a lot of money anymore, but there's two important things to keep in mind as far as that goes. One, that had at the time made it the biggest opening weekend in history. And two, adjusted for inflation, that number is more than $117 million today. Also, according to the numbers.com, the average ticket price in 1999 was $5.08, whereas today it is $10.78. So you have to adjust not just for inflation, but also for ticket prices to understand how it could only make $68 million, which today would be looked at as a giant bust. But not so much back then. According to Box Office Mojo's adjusted scale, which is really good, I like this a lot, they account for inflation and ticket price fluctuations. So The Phantom Menace is the 19th highest grossing movie of all time based on that ranking. And alongside Avatar, Endgame, and The Force Awakens, one of just 4 movies released in the last 25 years on the all-time grossing list. Now, this is interesting to me because right now, of course, we are having a big national discussion about box offices and about the amount of money that movies make. And it's really hard to sort of stack these things side by side, because you look at a lot of the movies on the top 10 grossing all-time list adjusted, and they're movies that were in theaters for like 19 months, right? Because before we had home video, they would just release a movie and just leave it there forever. And you could go see Star Wars, the original one, like a year and a half after it came out, because otherwise, when the fuck else are you going to see it? There's no such thing as VHS at the time. So a lot of these movies had a long time to build up these box office numbers. And then, of course, you've got like re-releases and all that sort of thing. So it's really hard to do a one-to-one contrast here. But suffice to say, like, one of the highest grossing movies of the last 25 years, for sure.
Absolutely.
Endgame made a gajillion. I mean, it made so much money, printed money, and legitimately even adjusted for all that sort of thing. But what do you make of? We're going to do a special episode about this pretty soon. But what do you make of the emerging box office crisis? And are movies in movie theaters dying? Are we going to close all the cinemas in the country and watch bad Netflix movies forever? What do you think?
Let's hope not. It's wild. I could see it going either way. I can't imagine a world without movie theaters.
Yeah.
But knowing the landscape now, knowing what streaming is, and how people can be just as comfortable sitting at home watching a movie on their big screen, I don't know. I really don't. I think it now seems 5 years ago, 10 years ago, no, there's no way. But now I'm not sure. I think I could see a world where there are no movie theaters. It's crazy to think, but I think it could be a reality.
Or at least ones where it's sort of like what IMAX theaters are today. There's a few of them in certain kind of centralized locations, and they only show a certain caliber of movie, right? It's weird. I think there is a slight overreaction to this Memorial Day weekend. So we're just past Memorial Day, and that is typically the beginning of so-called summer movie season, and it was one of the worst Memorial Day weekends in history, and it certainly is alarming. But I think there are a bunch of factors at play there that we maybe should not quite sign the death warrant for the movie theater yet. How often do you go to the movies less than you used to? Like, anecdotally, do you think that you're part of the problem?
I really do. I hate to say it, because I'm a movie guy. But I go much less now than I did ever in my life.
Yep.
And since the pandemic, a lot of things have changed. I just don't have the same level of desire to go to the movie theater. Now, I will say, Alien, when it came back for 45th anniversary, I did go for that. I went last year to see The Exorcist. So there, to your point, there might be certain movies that would drop that would force me to go to the theater. But other than that, even as a movie guy, I don't go as often as I used to.
Yeah, I mean, having kids is always for me always that is a factor that will always play in. We don't go anywhere or do anything because I have children. But yeah, certainly, like I think the pandemic and the idea of just being around people in a closed space, is still just as not appealing in the way that it used to be. And I don't know. There's a lot of stuff going on here, and obviously we'll talk more about it in the future. But interesting to get your perspective on that. And the idea, like the most recent time. So you went to go see Alien, a movie that you had already seen, I'm assuming, and I went to go see The Phantom Menace with my kids, a movie that I've already seen many times, and they've already seen too. So Maybe just re-release old movies instead of rebooting them. Just, put Independence Day in the theater.
There you go. I'm good with it.
So the Phantom Menace is eating up the box office throughout the month of May and will continue to go on to print money throughout the rest of the year. Meanwhile, other movies are staying the hell away from the box office for a time, at least for a couple of weeks, with one exception. The major exception is on May 21st, a movie called The Love Letter, starring Kate Capshaw, Tom Selleck, Ellen DeGeneres, and Tom Everett Scott, blast from the 1990s past. Is released as kind of a rom-com counter-programming to the Phantom Menace for people who want to go see literally anything else. This is notable for being the last movie that Kate Capshaw made before officially retiring from cinema in 2001. Wonder how she's still holding up if, Oh, right, Steven Spielberg's her husband. That probably helps. On May 28th, we have two interesting ones. Notting Hill, a movie that we've talked about on this podcast, and one that we have not yet talked about on this podcast, which is something of a cult favorite now. The 13th Floor opens on May the 28th. So Notting Hill is a great movie. That is one of the first movies to start to kind of pierce the armor of the Phantom Menace and sort of make some money in the box office against that behemoth quite bravely. 13th Floor did not do as well, but was very kind of popular among the sort of like Matrix horror crowd. Is that a movie that you're familiar with? Have you seen that one?
Surprisingly, that is a blind spot for me. And a lot of the movies that were released in this period of time are, Notting Hill I've seen a couple times. I like that movie. Well aware of it. I vaguely remember the documentary Trekkies came in around that time. I never saw it, but I'm aware of it. But
right.
Yeah, but the 13th Floor, no idea. Before doing a little bit of research, never heard of it, surprisingly.
It's pretty good. It's very sort of like high concept, mid-budget 90s movie that there was a lot of at the time and were kind of hit and miss. Sort of in the same kind of space as like Dark City, but like not as good. But it's a pretty interesting movie. I haven't seen it in years, so I'm kind of wondering how it holds up, but I remember very much liking it in college. And I know it's one of those movies that a lot of people on Twitter will cite as like a hidden gem, so to speak. So we'll get to that one eventually. It's very distant on the list, but we will talk about the 13th Floor one of these days. All right, so Phantom Menace eating up the box office for the rest of the month. Let's talk about music. What's going on in May? So this is a pretty interesting period of time. There's a couple of really notable albums that came out in this time. There's a couple of less notable ones from names that are very much of the era, including new albums from Insane Clown Posse, Anti-Flag, Linkin Park, and digging more into the 80s, The Pretenders also released an album during this time. But two or three notable ones. Len released their album You Can't Stop the Bum Rush, which basically goes unnoticed until July with the release of their big summer single, Steal My Sunshine, which we have argued on this podcast is a banger.
I agree 100%.
All right, so you were rocking Steal My Sunshine?
I really was. I probably kept the volume down a little bit, it was a little bit of a guilty pleasure, but I loved it. I still do.
Why is it so good? Like, what's great about that?
No, it's just so catchy. And it puts me in a certain place and time, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Like lying in the grass on Sunday morning of last week?
Who knows? Maybe. Yes, absolutely. So, yeah, I don't know. It's almost ridiculous that I like that song so much and still do to this day because there's no reason why I should.
Yeah.
But I do.
Yeah, it should be bad. It really should. That guy's voice is grating. Like, it's such this weird late 90s, like, California surfers. It's everything about it screams this should be the worst song ever made. And yet, soon as you hear that, dun, 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 you're like, oh yeah, let's go, right? And then, of course, it appears on the Go soundtrack, and it's that validates it, if nothing else. But
absolutely,
we got to wait for July for that song to come out as a single. But meanwhile, their album, which apparently is their third album,
really,
okay. And I think they broke up like right after that. But yeah, I guess
okay, that makes sense.
There's two other Len albums, so go check those out and tell us
Yeah,
how they
I
are.
may or may not check those out. I'll let you know.
May the 17th and May the 18th are two big ones. So on May 17th, Moby releases his 5th studio album, one that will go on to dominate the sort of soundscape of the next couple of years, Play. So this is the album with West Side and Porcelain and all of those. This is not, again, it's his 5th album, but this is his first major pop breakthrough. This is what makes Moby a superstar for a few years before he went and sold tea and said weird stuff about Natalie Portman. So I loved this album. I didn't get it. I don't think I bought it for until the next summer. I think I bought it in the summer of 2000 when it had already sort of been out there and those singles had done really well. I loved this album. I think this is one of the best pop albums ever made. What's your feeling about Moby?
Yeah, I don't have the same affection for the album or his music, but I will say I always enjoyed it. I never bought the album. I never downloaded it later on, but I always enjoyed it. When I would hear the music on, I would not change it. It was definitely enjoyable, but for some reason I just didn't connect with it in a personal way that I ever felt any reason to own any of it, I guess.
Makes sense. Yeah. I think I had enough people sort of convince me that it was worth having, and I listened to it over and over and over again in the summer of 2000 and thought it was pretty wonderful. But yeah, his next album after that is the one with We Are All Made of Stars or whatever, and didn't do quite as well, and then he just sort of stopped being this kind of cultural icon. But that was big, and Porcelain was all over the place for many months after that album came out. And then on May the 18th, this is a big one too, the Backstreet Boys released their album Millennium, which included singles like Larger Than Life, Show Me the Meaning of Being Lonely, and of course one of the single greatest pop songs of all time, which had been already dominating the airways for a month, I Want It That Way. Now, I'm not a big boy band person. I'm certainly not a big Backstreet Boys fan, but man, I Want It That Way. I will go to my grave defending that as a great pop song. What's your opinion of I Want It That Way?
Okay, so, oh boy, I hate it. I don't know.
You hate the song?
Yeah, I don't know what it is
Really?
about it, John, but I do. I hate it, and I think I'll give you a little story. So, at that point in time, that summer, I worked in a factory. I was just out of high school trying to figure out what I want to do with my life, and I worked in a factory, and they would have the radio on, the local station, and that song played every 10 minutes, I swear. So, as much as I thought it was kind of catchy at first, I grew to hate that fucking song because I heard it, I don't know, hundreds of times that summer. So if I never have to hear it again, it'll be too soon. And listen, today, I don't mind it as much as I did for a while, but I swear for a while I never wanted to hear it again. But you get it. If you get overexposed to something, it can drive you absolutely nuts.
All right, back to Millennium. So speaking of Millennium, ironically, 3 days after the release of the Backstreet Boys' Millennium, Chris Carter's quasi X-Files spinoff Millennium ends on Fox after 3 seasons. Are you an X-Files guy?
Not really. I've watched a few episodes here and there. I even tried about 2 years ago or so. I decided I'm going to start the pilot. I'm going to work my way through. When I have free time, I'm going to watch an episode as I can. And I just got 2-3 episodes in, and I just couldn't get back there. And I don't know why.
Yeah. It really is it's another one of those you had to be there kind of things, right?
I think so. I think you're right. Yeah.
I know a few people who've watched it in a modern setting and liked it, but there's something about I love it, but I watched it religiously when it was on. And one of the things is that conspiracy theories are not fun anymore. They're very scary and dangerous now and all over the place. Yes. And one major political party is basically run by them. So, it's sort of watching this stuff is not the same kind of remove that you could have in the 1990s. There is that.
Exactly.
It's a very
I think
90s
that's
aesthetic. That's a big part of it.
Yes. I think some things are so of their time that it's hard to look at it the same way in a modern lens, really.
Yeah, and I still think it's an objectively great show, but it's like Jeff Buckley. It's like, well, I'm not sure I could recommend it to you if you're just kind of going in cold, unless you have a very specific kind of taste in television shows. Anyways, Millennium starred Lance Henriksen, who is of course a great genre icon. It was a weird kind of apocalyptic, the end times are coming, Y2K vibe show that really could not have lasted beyond 1999 for kind of obvious reasons, and was pretty good, but like whatever. I actually think Millennium might hold up better than the X-Files because it's sort of more over the top, indulgent, kind of like horror oriented than the X-Files is, but I haven't gone back and revisited it. But I do think it's ironic that two things named Millennium both began and ended within a few days of each other at a time when that word was something everybody was saying all the time.
Absolutely.
So, same day, May 21st, David Simon's acclaimed homicide Life on the Streets also comes to an end. Simon's next big series, of course, The Wire, would premiere on HBO 3 years later. Did you watch Homicide? It sounded like that's more your vibe at the time.
You would think, but never did. Another show that I have intended to delve into at some point, and probably will, but have not yet done so.
What about The Wire?
I did watch some of The Wire. I have not watched it in, well, it's probably been about 18, 19 years. So it's definitely a series, because I never finished it, but it's something I definitely want to get back in there. And I think it's one of those shows that will hold up even now. So it's something I'm going to get back into.
It's really interesting because, so I recently, because the Sopranos started in 99 as well, and I recently rewatched the whole series. I say rewatched. When it was on, I watched it sporadically. I think I watched most of the first couple seasons, then a little bit here and there, then some of the last season, right? And I saw the finale and all that sort of thing. So a couple summers ago, when I was like, I should have been working on my master's thesis, I decided to watch all the Sopranos as a way of avoiding doing writing and work and that sort of thing.
There you go.
I did finish my thesis, so it all ended well. What I think is really interesting about that is when you watch the beginning episodes of The Wire, which they're pretty close in terms of timeline of when they started. The early seasons of The Sopranos and the early seasons of The Wire look very much like a kind of typical network drama. The aesthetic of prestige television hasn't really happened yet, so you're just kind of looking at like what a CBS drama would look like on HBO for a couple seasons. And as both of those shows progress, you start to kind of see the more kind of like cinematic style that we're used to seeing, right? The sort of high production value style that we're used to seeing in television shows today. And they both are like that.
Yep, no, I agree. The Sopranos is another one I've never gotten into. I will be honest with you, I have never watched a single episode. And I think it's I know. Well, at that time I didn't have HBO. I was in a different place in my life. A lot of stuff going on, and it was one of those things that as time went on, I felt like I was like I was out of the know, and I was like, I don't know that I can jump in now. I was intimidated, I think, at that point. So because it has such a lore. So at some point I would like to. I just have not yet.
Yeah, it's worth doing as long as you can kind of rewrite your expectations of what prestige television should look like.
Yeah.
Right. Because there are episodes, especially in the first couple of seasons, that really do feel like something you just would watch on CBS in like 1997, right? The production values, the writing style, the acting style is very TV, and then it kind of evolves over time. I was in college when it started, and I had friends. I had my HBO friend. Like, we all had the HBO friend in college. The guy who had like the expensive cable package, and you would go to that person's room to go watch The Sopranos. But if you missed one, you missed one, and you're kind of out of luck. And then once, I'm out of college, like I can't really watch The Sopranos anymore because I'm a poor post student who's not in college anymore. So that's why I kind of only saw the first couple seasons and then sporadically bits and pieces here and there. But yeah, I'd be interested. You should watch the whole thing and do an episode about it. I'd be interested to see what you have to say about the legacy of The Sopranos.
Yeah, I'll definitely get to that point. I'm up for the challenge.
All right, so also in those weeks ending on television on the WB, a former network that no longer exists, a couple of their flagship shows, the Wayans Brothers, Sister Sister, and Smart Guy, all are canceled at the same time on the WB. On NBC, a classic sitcom from the 90s comes to a temporary close, Mad About You, which was revived recently for a season or two, I can't remember. Melrose Place on Fox, speaking of the 90s, and Clueless on UPN, and one of the major staples of 90s television, Home Improvement on ABC, closes Tool Time for the last time at the end of May of 1999. Did you watch any of those shows?
Yeah, I actually enjoyed Sister Sister. Another weird one
good.
for me to. Yeah, it's actually it was a very good program. So I enjoyed that. I watched that, and I'm not afraid to admit that I was a Home Improvement kid. I grew up on it. I loved it. Yeah. Oh my gosh, it could have went on a little bit longer for me, but as the kids grew up, it was a different show. Obviously, a different tone, but great program. And hey, even as an adult, I've gone back. Last year, I went back and watched some episodes, and it's still as good today as it was then.
It's a really
absolutely
good show.
It really
it's
is.
really
Yeah.
good.
Melrose Place was just kind of there for me, but because I did like 90210, but Melrose Place seemed a little too adult for me, and I just wasn't ready for it at that time.
Yeah. No, it's exactly what it was though, too, right? Melrose Place was like 90210 for people who were like 5 years older than the 90210 demo, and that's all it was. And it's weird because it had a very specific kind of demographic where like obviously smart, serious television people are like, not, it's a soap opera. Like it's not something that you're like watching, it was indulgent and it was like over the top and everything else. And if you liked soaps, but like weren't home during the day, I guess it was a good show for you. But yeah, I mean, they definitely do not make shows like that anymore. No. Right. That was very much of its time. Tia and Tamara Mowry were great. It was a really good cast in that show. It was surprisingly good for the WB, which struggled to make quality television.
Yes.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer not included. Look, Home Improvement to me is like, that is one of the great embodiments of like the vibe of the 1990s. Really, like something about that show more than anything else like makes me really nostalgic for like being a young person in the 1990s. I don't know what it is or like how it does it, but there's something just really pure and great about that show. My feelings about Tim Allen as a person aside, like
yes,
it was a damn good show. And I will fight anybody who says otherwise.
I'm right there with you. I got your back.
All right, man. In other television-related news, this was a big one if you were there at the time. And this meant nothing to me in real life, but I knew about it and was like, good for her. On May 21st, actress Susan Lucci finally wins a Daytime Emmy on her 19th nomination for playing Erica Kane on the ABC soap opera All My Children, which for the time somehow became national news. I don't know why, but everybody was talking about it. Do you remember when this happened?
No, not at all. Not at all. If you'd have put a gun to my head and told me to tell you how many nominations she had, I'm done.
Are you familiar now, though, like through osmosis, that like Susan Lucci kept not winning an Emmy and then did?
No, daytime television just... I'm aware it exists, or it existed, and still exists, but it was totally off my radar. I had no idea.
I think it's I mean, just being a couple years older, I've never watched, like I've seen episodes of soap operas, right? But like I couldn't pick Susan Lucci out of a lineup I don't know, but I do, like, I remember that this was this thing where for the her like 16th, 17th, 18th nomination, everybody was like, she's gonna win finally, and then she doesn't, and it became this joke, and then like she finally won her Emmy after 19 nominations, and it was like literally on the news, and I'm like, that's the only reason I knew about it, is that people were talking about Susan Lucci
Unreal.
finally winning a fucking daytime Emmy for a soap opera. But yeah, this is the stuff we were worried about.
Yeah.
That's how good things were, kids. That made the
Yes.
news.
That was
Susan
our
Lucci.
biggest concern, was her getting her daytime Emmy.
Well, with that, I guess let's talk about the two like things that were kind of a big deal and relevant to the world that were going on at the time as well. So one of these is pretty bleak, and the other is actually kind of funny. So we're going to go to May 27th. We're going to close out with world news. On May 27th, 1999, former Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic is indicted in The Hague for war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in Kosovo. After a standoff that lasted 36 hours, Milosevic was finally arrested by Yugoslav authorities and in June was extradited to The Hague. He was tried for the crimes of, and this is a long list, so here we go. Tried with the crimes of complicity in genocide, deportation, murder, persecutions on political, racial, or religious grounds, inhumane acts / forcible transfer, extermination, imprisonment, torture, willful killing, unlawful confinement, willfully causing great suffering, unlawful deportation or transfer, extensive destruction and appropriation of property not justified by military necessity and carried out unlawfully and wantonly, cruel treatment, plunder of public or private property, attacks on civilians, destructions or willful damage done to historical monuments and institutions dedicated to education or religion, unlawful attacks on civilian objects. Those were his charges. The trials began in February of 2002, but were still not concluded when he was found dead in his prison cell of a heart attack on March 11th, 2006. R.I.P. Slobodan Milosevic, we hardly knew ye. Yeah, no, that was a big deal. I mean, you were alive through the Yugoslav War. I'm sure you remember that was, one of the major international events of the 1990s.
Absolutely, yeah.
Of our youth, and Slobodan Milosevic was a bad person. So
absolutely,
fuck that guy.
Yes, please, double fuck him.
And then shit. this speaking of bad people and global events of the 1990s. This was fun. This is from the New York Post, May the 31st, 1999. It's a good way to close this out. The headline, this is why I'm mentioning it. Saddam eyed in execution massacre of Virginia family. This is a fucking wild story, by the way, and I've never heard this before, but here's what the body of the text says. It's a Saddam Hussein headline. I was like, the 90s, early 2000s. If Saddam comes up, you got to talk about Saddam. Mm-hmm. Quote, the FBI is investigating whether a Virginia man, his wife, and son were killed by operatives of Saddam Hussein because the Iraqi dictator was unhappy over a business deal, it was reported today. The shooting deaths of Fuad Taima, wife Dorothy, and their 16-year-old son Leith fit the pattern for the way Iraqi agents handle people whose business deals with the butcher of Baghdad go bad, a government source told the Washington Post. Fairfax cops who were jointly investigating the execution-style murders with the feds have ruled out a domestic fight or a robbery as the motive for the killings, but said it's premature to link them to Saddam. The Taima family was found massacred in their Fairfax County home on Friday. All three were shot in their upper bodies. The murder weapon wasn't recovered, the paper said. Taima, 63, a native Iraqi, made frequent trips to the homeland, one as recently as 2 weeks ago, the paper reported. The founder for the nonprofit American Iraqi Foundation, Taima criticized President George Bush that's the first one, by the way, during the Gulf crisis for imposing a travel ban and urged him to open peace talks with Saddam. Taima wanted to establish trade deals between Washington, D.C. and Baghdad involving several products as well as military contracts, sources told the paper. Quote, it's fair to say that Taima is a high-profile figure, one of the many people who do business with Saddam. Francis Brooke, the Washington representative for the Iraqi National Congress, which opposes Saddam, told the paper. Everyone thinks it was a political killing. But other Iraqi sources speculated Taima and his family may have been killed by anti-Saddam groups who were furious about his history of good relationships with the strongman. FBI spokeswoman Susan Lloyd confirmed the bureau has been called in. Our major case squad was asked to assist. She said, we're assisting in conducting interviews and the examination of the crime scene. And as far as I can tell, the crime remains unsolved. So podcasters, if you're looking for a good place to start a true crime podcast, get on it. Last I read about this case was 2011. And as of 2011, there is still a cold case. I have no idea who murdered this family of 3 people in Fairfax, Virginia.
Holy shit. What a shit show.
Isn't that fucking crazy?
It really is. Insane.
Like,
let's go back to talking about daytime Emmys.
Well, I mean, you know, we are of the generation that lived through like Saddam as the modern Hitler, which is like an absurd thing to say or think. But yeah, it's possible that like Saddam or people who hate Saddam like had this family fucking killed, and no one has ever solved this crime. I had never heard about this before, and I thought that was
first time I'm hearing it too. But it's crazy, fascinating
little 1990s nugget
for sure.
So that's it. That's May 31st, 1999, and that brings us to the end. So, Justin, how do you feel about all that?
I feel great about it. I learned some stuff today. I realized that there's some stuff from 1999 that I really need to get into because as much as there's so many great movies in 99, one of the great movie years in history, but there's a lot of good television that's been off my radar, and there have been some blind spots for me. So a lot of stuff for me to check out.
Yeah. Good fodder for the future of your podcast.
Without a doubt.
Speaking of your podcast, can you maybe preview what's ahead?
Yeah. So I have a second installment coming up of something I call Personal Reflections, where it's a little bit of a variety show where I talk about a couple specific moments in pop culture and how they connected to my life at that time. So that's coming up soon. And then I do have 2 movie episodes coming up soon on films that are celebrating anniversaries, including the film Speed and Wes Craven's New Nightmare. And then I have yes.
Wait, what anniversary? Is it the 30th anniversary of New Nightmare?
Is
it
94? It is 94. But yeah, both Speed and New Nightmare. I know, it's crazy, right? This podcast makes me feel so old.
Yeah. The Speed thing, I'm still like process. I've known this for a while, right? The 30 years.
Yeah.
Just not okay. New Nightmare. I don't think I saw New Nightmare until probably like 98. Like it was a while until I saw it.
Okay.
I think that movie is amazing. Like what does it still hold up? I don't think I've seen it since then, but like not to like spoil your episode, but like
no, you're good. Is
it still good?
It's better. It's fucking amazing. I rewatch a lot of horror films every year around Halloween and throughout the year, and I rewatched New Nightmare twice last year because it's that fucking good. Because it's the first time I rewatched it in probably 5 or 6 years, and as an adult, it works even better for me. It's amazing. I am a big fan of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise,
sure.
And I could easily someday say it might be the best in the entire franchise.
Oh, I think it is. I mean, my memory of it is that it was right. That and the first one is that it's sort of competing. What I find so like weird about it is that it did the whole like meta commentary on horror movies before Scream did.
Yes.
They're both Wes Craven, and yet people talk about Scream as though it like invented that idea, and I'm like, but New Nightmare did this like 3 years ago. What are we doing?
He sure did. Yeah, it's the template for Scream. I feel like you don't get Scream without New Nightmare. Here's where he's getting his feet wet, and oh man, it's so fucking good. It really is. If someone likes Scream but they haven't watched New Nightmare or haven't in a while, they need to do themselves a favor and do it because it's excellent.
Right. And Speed is a movie. There's 4 movies that came out in the 1990s that I saw upwards of 10 times in a movie theater. One of them is The Phantom Menace. One of them is Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, which came out when I was 12, and I watched it so many goddamn times. One of them is Jurassic Park,
of course,
which I saw 13 times in the movie theater.
Nice.
And one of them is Speed, which I saw 11 times in a movie theater.
Wow, that's awesome.
Speed is an incredible movie. I'm glad that people are starting to talk about it again because it's 30th anniversary.
Yep.
Was that one that you saw like at the time and you've loved forever, or like?
Yes. Yeah, I did not go to the theater to see it, but I did see it as soon as it was released. My mom, left me rent it from the video store. I watched it immediately and I rewatched it. And I think when it was on television, I ended up taping it on a VCR so that I could rewatch it again and again. And yeah, it's still one of those movies that has stayed with me for 30 years.
Yeah.
I love it. I absolutely love it.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I know that it's sort of a pipe dream, although they've said they'd like to do it. But man, I would just love for Keanu and Sandra Bullock we talked about this when we talked about Forces of Nature, but like Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves to get back together and make another Speed movie. So here's a question for you, like philosophically, right? Would that be Speed 3, or would you name it something else to sort of not canonically, but sort of implicitly say that Speed 2 doesn't count? Like how do you do that?
Yeah, no, we need to pretend like Speed 2 doesn't exist, which I do. I pretend, I tell myself it doesn't exist because it's a piece of shit. And without Keanu, forget about it. So they're going to have, if they would do it, it's going to have to be something else, I'm afraid. But just putting those two together. No, it can't be. No way. No way.
So you gotta somehow like make it clear that it's part of the Speed verse, right? But like not make it Speed 3.
Correct. Yes.
No, I completely agree. The one thing about Speed 2 that to this day drives me insane is that it's the greatest title for a movie in history.
Yes.
Cruise Control is like, what a genius pun.
Yeah.
And yet you blew the budget on thinking of a title, and then
well, and us wrestling fans would say, and then the bell rang, which is to say the title was great, the movie was shit.
You got Willem Dafoe to be your bad guy, and you still fuck it up
exactly.
Somehow. But Cruise Control,
I know.
Come on, it works on so many levels. It's so fun. All right, whatever. I'm more mad that movie sucks than anything else.
I agree.
Like movies can suck, but like that shouldn't have sucked.
No, it shouldn't have.
You shouldn't have made the movie without Keanu.
Exactly.
Jason Patrick's fine and everything, but
sure, he's not Keanu.
So like, I guess what you would do is instead you'd come up with some word that's associated with the word speed, but not Speed 3.
Yes.
So like, whatever. I don't get paid to do that, so I can't think of a word that works for it. But some genius must. All right. Anyways, look out for those episodes. Justin, pleasure to have you. Thank you for joining me. This is a great time.
My pleasure.
Great way.
I had fun.
Great way to spend an evening after a bizarre day in America.
Yes.
I'm gonna check and make sure that all the cities in the country are still standing and intact. Right now, it's been an hour, so.
Hey, ignorance is bliss.
Yeah, absolutely.
For right now, at least.
We'll be back soon with 3 to Tango for our finale for the rom-com season. Check out Justin's show wherever you're on, all the platforms. Yeah,
absolutely, anywhere you can find podcasts. I'll give a little shout out to the network that I am part of, which is the You Run Podcast Network, and yourunpodcast.com. You can find my show along with all the great members of that network, so go over there and check them out too.
Fantastic. Thanks, Justin. This was great, and we'll see you soon, and look out for frogs.
that way.